The entity is the most fascinating part of Dead by Daylight, and the reason the game even exists in the first place. A being that nobody can explain or give shape to, which does not think like any known creature would, and that feeds on the emotions of everyone that it steals inside its world by forcing them to play its own games. A concept like this is not something unique for Dead by Daylight, as many other eldritch beings exist like that in other media. Pennywise is a supernatural creature that feeds on fear and can take many shapes, including a spider one like the entity can. And the concept of cosmic horror creatures that human brains cannot understand were also popularized by H.P. Lovecraft, which the devs clearly got their inspiration from. But did you know that the visual design of the entity that we have in Dead by Daylight is not actually inspired by Pennywise or by anything Lovecraftian? In fact, the actual design of the entity that many of us will be familiar with is actually inspired by a music video. On a Dead by Daylight livestream made in January 11th of 2018, Matthew Cote straight up confirmed where the visual design of the entity came from.
The entities look, especially what we call the daddy fingers that come and grab you when you're on the hook.
Big Daddy, I think is its actual name in the code.
One of the inspiration for this was the video clip for that Belgian singer we like, Stromae.
Yes, Stromae.
Yeah, and the song is called Cancer, and it's really the goosebump inducing song, and the video is super creepy. Go check it out.
Yeah.
And as you can see, well, the design was not only inspired by this video, it was basically taken from it, including the weird spider-like movements that the entity does when it's about to take a survivor on the second stage of a hook. What is curious is that the video talks about cancer and how damaging it is to the human body and how hard it is to escape it. Even on the video itself, we can see how cancer kills Stromae and takes his soul to the sky, just like a survivor is taken by the entity once their struggle meter ends. So now you know, the biggest inspiration behind the entity in Dead by Daylight is cancer. We already know that some of the killers in Dead by Daylight are just as victims as the survivors are. Arguably sometimes, their fate was worse than anything the survivors lived, and it's thanks to this torture that the entity is able to make the killers follow its orders and play their games. Ken Kaneki is just another one of those victims, as we know in the original Tokyo Ghoul source that he would not be killing innocent survivors by his own will. But hunger is a great motivator, and that's the way the entity broke this killer. If you remember from a past episode of my Creepyfacts videos, you will know that the hag is also being manipulated this way. Every hit she does, she drinks the blood of the survivors, and her mori is just her consuming them. But every single time after a match ends, everything she consumes gets burned, just like the pallets and the crows do when you interact with them in game, which keeps the hag in a perpetual state of infinite hunger. This same thing is now applied to Kaneki. Anytime he drinks the survivor's blood with his auto-aim attack, it all just ends up disappearing out of his stomach and returning back to the survivors. And the same happened with his mori, as despite him feasting on a survivor, it doesn't satiate him at all, as the moment he's back in the campfire, he will scream and suffer as if he didn't eat anything yet. Unknown also seems to be kept hungry by the entity in order to do its bidding, as one of its lines in the lobby talks about the hunger it feels.
Hunger and horror. Hunger.
So that means it is possible that anytime the Unknown consumes a survivor's soul during a Memento Mori, their soul gets stolen from the Unknown by the entity in order to keep it trying to get survivors every single time. And the worst part is that we know the entity is doing this intentionally, as just like it can give infinite hunger to the killers, it can also keep that hunger away from them. Compare Rize to Kaneki, and you can clearly see what I mean. Whereas Kaneki does his killing because he is forced to do so in order to survive, Rize does it just for pure enjoyment. She is not suffering in the lobby screen, and her Memento Mori shows how she consumes the blood in a calmer way compared to Kaneki. And this is because Rize does not need any convincing by the entity in order to hunt survivors. In fact, it is given an infinite supply of food to her, so she loves being here. Dracula is another great example of this, and he even says that the realm is vampire heaven. When you think of a vampire, you might expect him to drink the blood of survivors just like Hag does, but this is completely the opposite case. Anytime you hit a survivor with him, he just swipes the blood away, showing that he doesn't even need it. Even in his Mori animation, the vast majority of the blood is drained before he gets to drink it, showing how disrespectful he is to his prey, and how he doesn't really need them to stay alive. And this is because, once again, Dracula loves the entity, so anything he consumes in the matches is just a snack. It just shows how the entity is very careful at choosing its victims and the treatment it gives to them. Those killers who will serve and enjoy what they're doing will be treated better than those who try to resist, and the entity will do whatever it takes in order to make them submit. This all started when I was playing 2 vs 8 as Naughty Bear, one of my favorite skins in the game, and of course I had to perform a Memento Mori with him, which is the moment I asked my friend if they were able to hear what the narrator said, and the answer was actually no, that they did not hear the narrator, but they did hear Naughty making the boo scream at the end. And this made me think, can survivors hear the narrator too? So I did a test, and it turns out that no, they cannot hear the narrator's voice, so the Memento Mori on their end looks even creepier than it does on the killer's POV, and only the player using Naughty Bear can hear the narrator. This detail might seem random to some, but it actually paints a very creepy narrative for Naughty Bear fans. The narrator that Naughty hears is all in his head. It does not exist as a supernatural being that other players can hear. The British narrator only exists in order to influence Naughty Bear into killing the survivors and not giving them any chances. We know from past killers that the entity is able to manipulate certain characters through various means, and we know that it can communicate in some way to characters if it wants to, like how it whispered to the Plague in order to act as if it was her god talking to her, how it slowly corrupted the spirit's father in order to bring him to madness, or how it communicates with the killers anytime you use the Whispers perk. So, does that mean that all this time, the entity was the narrator from the Naughty Bear games? Was it the entity who manipulated Naughty into killing the other bears by using his rage from not being invited to the party? And was this all in preparation before taking him inside the realm to do the entity's bidding? Does that mean the entity is actively using a British voice in order to keep Naughty as a killing machine? I will let you decide. One detail that I always found curious is the separation between legendary cosmetics and ultra rare cosmetics. When a cosmetic is legendary, it means that it is not a skin, but rather a different character altogether, like in the case of the Miss Fuchi skin for Artist, where we play as Miss Fuchi herself, and not Artist doing a cosplay. In the case of the Attack on Titan cosmetics, or other ultra rares like Krampus and the God of Desire, it is the entity recreating those outfits and forms, either from the memories of other survivors or from legends and stories told around the world that inspire fear, like the Minotaur. Both Tomie and Miss Fuchi are represented as legendary cosmetics. However, the Junji Ito Dredge cosmetic is not considered as legendary, and this is something I found weird, as why wouldn't it be? Eddie is considered legendary because it's the actual Eddie from the Iron Maiden albums, and the souls that appear on the Dredge cosmetic are actually the same people from the Mysterious Tunnel manga. So what's going on here? This made me rethink once again on the categorization of the legendary cosmetics. According to the developers and artists, this outfit is not the actual character from the manga. This is a cosmetic for the Dredge inspired by it. And when you take a look at the description of the outfit, it paints an even darker picture. Based on this detail, we can deduce something very dark about this outfit. Whereas Miss Fuchi and Tomie were taken by the entity as is, it seems like for the tunnel cosmetic, it was actually the Dredge who decided to manifest itself inside the mysterious tunnel, based on the absolute misery that the tunnel gave to the souls trapped inside, as well as Gorou, the main protagonist of that manga. This means that the negative feelings of Gorou were so intense, combined with the absolute misery of the tunnel, that it manifested the Dredge just like Otto's cult did back in the Garden of Joy. And what this creature decided to do is take all the souls from the tunnel and absorb them inside its body, just like it does anytime you mori a survivor. And if you take a look at the main head of the Dredge, the soul it decided to take to manifest its head is the sister of Gorou. This is the soul that would have given the most fear and bad feelings to Gorou, and let me remind you that at the time of this story happening, her soul was taken while she was just a child. In other words, there is an amalgamation of bodies as a monster in the entity's realm taken straight from the source, and one of the bodies, which the Dredge uses as its head, Nebo's decomposed and distorted, belongs to a small child. The final fact of this video might be more of a theory rather than a fact, but I think it is all but officially confirmed by the developers, and it is related to the Black Veil cult and all of its subsidiaries, like the Black Talon, which is the one Taurie Kane and her parents belong to. In a past video of mine, talking about the plague, I mentioned a very strong theory about the plague being the reason why the Black Veil cult exists in the first place. The plague is, historically, the oldest character in Dead by Daylight that is playable, and according to her lore, in her last moments alive, while she was taking shelter in a cave with all of her followers, she made a last pact with the entity, which took her inside the realm to serve. What is important is that we know that the entity took Adiris inside the realm, but the lore explicitly states that her followers were not in that cave. This means two things. The first one is that they were taken inside the fog too, but this is not supported by anything currently in the game. And the other theory is that the entity did cleanse all of her followers from that sickness, which allowed them to live and prosper. This last theory can lead to some severe implications, because it would mean that her followers saw how Adiris was taken by the entity with the dark fog and possibly the spider legs that it has, and they would have also experienced a miracle where the entity cleansed them from the infection, which it is capable to do, as all survivors can clean it by interacting with the fountains. Of course, these followers, who were already believers in the first place, would only have their faith solidified further after seeing real evidence that their gods are real, and this could lead to the creation of the Black Veil, the cult which worships the entity. We know that, visually speaking, the members of this cult do look like the followers of Adiris, who used cloaks not to keep themselves in secrecy, but instead to hide the effects that the plague did to them. And this theory is not that far-fetched, and it is supported even more thanks to Vittorio's lore, which I completely missed in the original video. Among the many artifacts that Vittorio had to search in order to find the Lapis Paradisus, the stone which would let Vittorio travel inside the fog, one of the artifacts that they found under the obelisk of Theodosius was a stone tablet with Akkadian cuneiform talking about 3 keys that would open a chamber which holds the secrets of the entity, a being that has to be sealed in order to prevent chaos in the real world. And we know, thanks to Adiris' lore, that in her last expedition, she went north in Babylon, which would place her around Turkey, which is where Istanbul is located, and that obelisk where the artifact was found. it would further cement the fact that one of her followers, a scribe that knew Akkadian, the same language that the plague speaks, knew about the entity. This brings us to the present times, with Taurie Kane, the newest original survivor who belongs to the Black Talon, a cult that also worships the entity, and which also wears cloaks and masks in order to conceal themselves, just like the Black Veil does. You can even see that visually, they also know how the entity might physically manifest itself, as she holds a tendril of the entity in one of her cosmetics. And one of the curious things about her is that she is constantly holding a talisman in her right hand, just like the plague is holding her metallic sensor. And also, one of her animations is praying to the gods by extending her arms to the sky. And this is something that the plague also does in her lobby animation in a very similar manner. If this theory is true, that would mean that thanks to the plague being a fanatic of religion, and thanks to her making the deal with the entity and saving her people, the Black Veil cult was created, and Taurie Kane is connected to the plague more than any other survivor in the game. If you found this video interesting, consider hitting a like and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more of these types of videos. Additionally, if you have your own creepy theory or fact, let me know in the comments, and it might be featured in future episodes. Thank you for watching, and have a nice day!